All right, so I'd like to finish off today what we got into yesterday. I have a lot of material to cover, so let's try to make a move on it. Just to recap briefly where we're holding, right? So we got into the question of what is the basis bichlal for the takana that a kehila makes? Where does it come from? What's the power? And I brought a practical example. This is the hechsher question, the ban that was issued on a hechsher here in our community against the hechsher of another community in the MEMS. We went through some of the details of how it was written up at the time. And, right, so what the question is, what do we do practically now? No one's ever officially retracted it. I also mentioned my personal theory about how sometimes takanas just seem to evaporate, they seem to expire, and you just sort of forget about them naturally and you move on. Even in this case, it's very hard to find a copy of the Isser, the ban on this hechsher. Like I said, I thank Rabbi for sending me a copy. We got a bit into the shtetl of Harki. We went through the chayrim that they had at that time to protect the chazakas, people who rented certain properties, leased certain properties. If you take a look at the woman who printed more selections, you can actually see the list of chazakas, not a long list. And that gave us a sense of how kehilas worked in those days. And we saw how they actually cited Madam Alashkar, which is what we had started off with, about Yom Tovim, additional Yom Tovim. And that was to prove, it was cited there to prove that the takana lasts, it's a lasting takana. And then we started getting into a tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek, Simon Yigei Redei, Simon Kuf Tzedek Daled, which is the last of this series of tshuvas there on these topics. It was about a chayrim in Rudni, not to take svarim out of the Beis Medrash, and the question was, what about to a different Beis Medrash? Can we be matter the chayrim? So we removed the Tzemach Tzedek. Right, so the Tzemach Tzedek, we saw that Shulchan Aruch says it's not that hard to be mater chayrim, but the Tzemach Tzedek wanted to say maybe that's only if it's the original people who made the chayrim. Once it's the next generation, lav dafka, which we see from other places, that you have a minig, if there's a good minig that catches on, then the children, the mice of Bnei Beishan and the Bavli, the Fisugyas HaBavli, and the Dharam as well, we see. So Tzemach Tzedek suggests that maybe by Charamis we can say the same thing. That, now, it depends which shita you go with, we said. If you go with Tosfos and the Rosh, that the whole vart of a broad chayrim is based on the individual threat of a nidui. And here let me just take the opportunity to clarify the terminology, because someone mentioned, today they also talk about chayrim, a ban. So when you hear today that there's a ban against something, so that's just in very colloquial terms. A bunch of people got together and they wrote that we're against this. That's not using any particular halachic power, halachic concept per se. In Ivrit, it happens to be that the word for those bans is also chayrim, so it ends up being maybe slightly confusing. But no one would argue, I don't think, that these bans, these yisurim that come out periodically in different communities, have a halachic geder of chayrim or anything. I mentioned yesterday that there used to be charamis. Charamis used to be used pretty regularly up until a certain point. And again, by charamis I mean general, not just individual, a nidui against the person, but bichlal, enforcing, strengthening takanas with the power of a chayrim, and that's ended abruptly for historical reasons that I'll hopefully get to later on in the shiur. So that's not, no one's using those concepts today. It's just, it's approximating the same, it's using the threat of intimidation. You put out a letter, it's intimidating, and if you threaten someone, we'll take your kids out of yeshiva, out of the maistas, that's also intimidating. So it's using a very similar method of intimidation, but it's not an actual halachic concept being used here. There's no threat of nidui mamish, and there's no chayrim threatening that. So just to clarify that. So the Tosfos and the Rosh say that the chayrim in a takana is predicated, is based on the nidui that you'll suffer if you go against it. And we know that it's easy to undo a nidui. All you have to do is the people that made the nidui should take it back. So someone said, like, aha, in order to retract a nidui, you need to be g'doylem b'chachma b'minyan. So if you're applying that to the chayrim as well, so then you have to be g'doylem b'chachma b'minyan. Once it's the next generation, perhaps we should say that once it's b'dar acher le'shayach le'markein mi yedeyam him g'doylem b'chachma b'minyan k'maisan. So that would mean practically that only the first generation can be mater, not the second generation, just like Minhagim, just like Nadarim. Then the Tzemach Tzedek mentions there's a different mahalach, the Rashba and the Ran, that say, no, the reason why they were matir charamis is pasha mitzad the minute, because they always did it, so that's like almost like a tanai. There's like a built-in tanai that whenever we make a cherem, we acknowledged, it's a given that we can always take it back because that's what we always do. So Ebazoi has nothing to do with being matir and nidui, it's just, it's built in. So Ebazoi, you wouldn't need Gedolim B'chacham B'minyan, so that's around where we were holding. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, still, if the whole variety is that it's based on the minute, we always do it, we're always matir the cherem, so it's built in. So always matir the cherem usually is the people that made the cherem themselves. Who said there's a minig, there's an equivalent minig for the next generation to always be matir the cherem? So if that minig doesn't exist, so then that tanai doesn't exist. So there was no tanai in the cherem that people later can come and be matir it. Maybe only the people that made it. So the Tzemach Tzedek is creating this argument to say that it's not so simple anymore. Right? But we said that in Rudni they didn't even remember the details. It had been a cherem for such a long time. So then we concluded yesterday that the Tzemach Tzedek said, I found a discussion in Shut. So in Shuvas Mayim Rabim, Rofo, Moldola, 1700s, Italy, they had, we mentioned there was a tax, local taxes, surcharges for Pidyon Shvuyim, for the fund of Pidyon Shvuyim, literally to redeem captives. And it had been renewed a couple of times, but then they wanted to retract the transit tax, because the transit surcharge, because it was just backfiring. People weren't using the Jewish service, so the question was, what can we do here? Can we just, can we override it without Hatara, or do we need to be matir it? How are we matir it? So there's a whole discussion from Siman Samach Aleph to Siman Samach Hey. And they quote the Maribal there, that they quote seems to be more mekel, although he said the conclusion there is Sorach Lachker and Mkach HaMinig. And then there's a tshuva there in Siman Samach Hey, Yeshua Chanadali or something like that, from, I believe, from Greece, who writes that Kol Chedem Shech, and Tzemach Tzedek quotes him, Kol Chedem Shechrimu Harishonim V'so Heim L'Mnuchas, they moved on to a better place. Ein Koyach B'yad Haroyev Lahatir V'afil Yaskimu Kulam. Once they're gone, this Rabbi Yeshua says, it's too late. Because the whole vert is that there's a Tanai. The Tanai is that shall daitam hutal achedim yirtzu lahata yatunu me'atzmam. Those who made the chedem, there's that Tanai built in. But if kiblu al atzmam v'alzaram, and then they moved on, so then the pshita vadai that there is no go'enim that were matir labanim lahatir achedim, because it's too late. That's what he says. However, the mechaber of the Mayim Rabbi B'fol in Siman Samach Gimel, he writes on this question, Af kibidin didan eskimu b'koyach b'gzeiras chedem. And even though the Kadmoinim so heim l'menuchais, and there was no time limit, afilu hachi yechaylam abanim la'atira, ki loy pirshu shekiblu haskam aleim al-zarim. His first argument is, first of all, in this case, they never actually included the text that it's aleim al-zarim. And even if it did say that, kiban aleim al-baneinu, it's just increasing the time, but it's not taking away the fact that you have hatara through whatever means you need to take to be matir. So it sounds like these two rabbanim in the toughs, in the tough pays, that would be the 1720s. So they were arguing essentially around this point, right? So it's not the Tzemach Tzedek's new question. So now the Tzemach Tzedek comes back around. This is in Ois Beis. It comes back around to the question at hand. So if in your chedem they didn't say the words aleim v'al zaram, so then maybe even Rabbi Yeshua, even the machmer, maybe he would be made to the B'rfol that Yechayel Nahater, because his whole word was that kiblu aleim v'al zaram, and then they left, so there's no one left to be matir. But seems like you have a problem. You can't figure out exactly what it was. That's part of the issue here. No one knows what the chedem was. Everyone is just very scared of the chedem. So the Tzemach Tzedek says you could be mekel al yidei shayla l'chacham because there's a number of sveikas. Number one, we don't know if it was aleim v'al zaram, so that's a suffix. Number two, this maybe would remind some nowadays of Yabi Shut Yabi Omer. There's a suffix who the halacha is like in the machlekes and Shut Mayim Rav. Is the halacha like Rabbi Fall or is the halacha like Rabbi Yeshua? So we have another suffix. And number three, the whole problem we said until now is that you need a beis din that, if it's based on nidui or whatever, you need a beis din that's gedolim mehem b'chachma b'minyan. So look elsewhere, the other Makaitis that say that doesn't have to be Le'inyan HaToras Nida V'Chayrim, Siman Shin Lamed Dalet, I didn't have a chance to look it up. And according to the Rambam, it doesn't even have to be Kamaisan. So Abazai, you can be mitzaref these different things. And anyway, there's another suffix, Until now, the Tzemach Tzedek said, once the generation passes, we have no idea if it's Gedolim B'Chachma Minyan. Now the Tzemach Tzedek backpedals and says, maybe we do know. I mean, the city has been growing, probably. So this is Rudni. We don't know that they were growing, but Stama, they're bigger. U'B'Chachma, here the Tzemach Tzedek says, Yesh Leimer Dehavei Sveika, Shema Hein Shavim. We're not sure actually. Maybe we are Shavim B'Chachma as well. Maybe not Gedolim B'Chachma, maybe Shavim B'Chachma if you go with Shavim. So Abazai, that Tzemach Tzedek L'maisa is angling towards being matter the Chayrim, but with a combination of all these factors. It sounds like still that if it was Stama Chayrim Al Zaram, maybe not. Then the Tzemach Tzedek quotes some Makaitis that seem to suggest that they didn't find it so complicated for rabbanim to be matir achein. We quote some Maharik. Maharik seems to say that it's fine to just go ahead and be matir it. It's okay, maybe in that case you can infer that they didn't say Val Zaram. If they didn't say Val Zaram, then it's easier to be matir. Then there's a Rosh. The Rosh himself has a tshuva where he says, Chachmei Adosh Amdu Achareim, Em Nimluchu L'shanis Asatakana, Yitzrichim Lasis Kibbutz V'Askama Lahatit Chilas Achayim Shitil Harishayim. It sounds very casual that the Rosh just says, get a bunch of rabbanim together and be matir it. Now, maybe some would argue that maybe we can't compare ourselves to the Dur of the Rosh, but the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't entertain that chiluk. So it's a mashal from the Rosh, and anybody can come along and be matir Achayim Harishayim. So what about the Gedolim B'Chachma? So, no, you see from the Rosh L'chayre b'pshitus that Chermit Tzibur Ani Taran Gam Kem B'Dosh Achareim. How does the Rosh stem with the Rosh? We just explained the whole vart that Lefi the Rosh, the heter of a Chayrim is based on the heter of a Nidui. Not mitzad the minig. No, so he says that if you take this too extreme, then even B'Dor Echad, the second one person passes away, that's it. We lost one person, so now we're never going to be exactly that same composition. So we're never going to be Gedolim or Shavim B'Chachma Minyan. So clearly we can't take it that extreme. It's an Eid Yehuda that says that Mitzar HaMinig Yochel Mahatir Afim Meisu Gedolim Shebahem. But again, that you can find for. Tzemach Tzedek quotes Avodas HaGershuni, that a Maisa there that there was a Gzeira and a Kehillah that they couldn't appoint a Rav who was related to anybody in the Kehillah. I think I touched on it last year in a different context. And there was the big Rav, Rabbi Shraga, Five-ish, he had made this Gzeira, and then he moved to Tzvas. And Avodas HaGershuni wrote the Pashtus, the Pshitus, that they can be matirit. So you see, I got Nachamakar. So in this Ois Gimel, Tzemach Tzedek opened up the discussion a bit more, brought some other Makaitis, for some of them, not all of them, so there's a bit more of a tilt towards being open to the possibility that maybe it's not such a big deal to be matir charamas even in the next generation, but within the context of the tshuva, it just seems more like a sniff as opposed to changing his mind. And then the Tzemach Tzedek mentions another idea. Part of the shaila is that maybe the chayrim all along they would never have a problem if it's from one base medrash to another base medrash. So to say that that's mamash, that was their clear kavana, that seems like the Tzemach Tzedek is a makabel. But the way the Tzemach Tzedek rephrases it is that we can read their minds. That if we can say, when it comes to Nedarim, you go, Hilchem Acher Kavanas HaNeider, so here the Tzemach Tzedek borrows from the language of Nedarim. So what was the whole reason for the Chayrim? The reason was we don't want the Swarm to get lost, and you should be able to find them in the base Medrash. So the Ikar Vart was not to take it home, but if it's another base Medrash, that would not run against their implicit Kavanah, not explicit, implicit. And it's like we're coming here to be Ikar the Neder. We're leaving the neder in place. The chayin will still be in place. You're still not allowed to take you see a sefer in a base medrash, you're still not allowed to take it out. So, it should be fine. So kol hani tami, so between all of these factors, chazulit terufi lahater acherem, idea skamas hatzibur, so now you need to get the whole tzibur on board, and gimel chachamim ma'ayaris acherem, and the heter should only be on this prat, not to undo the whole thing, bli shinui chas v'shalom. And then there's some hagayos at the end. There was some tzedek mitzayin to Ravid in Tmim Deim, Ravid in Hilchos Mamrim, that the Ravid holds that even the takana is based in. If the tam is nisbatel, then even a based in cotton can be mevatel the takana. And a few more short things. So what did we get from this so far? So first of all, we've been introduced to some of the yisodos, some of the rules in Chermet Tzibur, and we see a bit of a practical example of how it was implemented in a kehillah and how they had a shayla, how they dealt with a shayla. And we see that Tzemach Tzedek is now running to be matter this type of thing. It's almost as if it's a gar shiver with a lot of svaras together. It's like, oh, the Tzemach Tzedek is able to be matter, and even in that case, we're leaving the etzem chayim in place. We're just changing one prat. Even though there were some Makairis that the Tzemach Tzedek himself cited, that made it sound like it's not such a... There's a different shuvah that gets into that question. Here the assumption is, okay, the question is, what did the people in the old base measures think about it? The shuvah doesn't acknowledge that. It says haskamas hatzibur, doesn't get into the question of roiv at all. That is another shuvah that we'll touch on. So let's move on to the next shuvah. Previous one in the Sefer, and we'll have to, due to time constraints, we're going to have to only do parts of the highlights of its shuvah. So, Tzemach Tzedek, Siman Kuf Tzedek Gimel. Now, it starts v'haran kosav. That's how the shuvah starts. So, we're clearly missing something there. But if you look in the old Mafteach, which is always helpful to look at when you look at the shuvah of Tzemach Tzedek, because the old Mafteach was a teichendik Mafteach. Sometimes there are additional pratim. We mentioned that legabe the color brown. So they write in their Mafteach, Hashayla Mavur Min HaTshuva, that it's Ever HaNohar of Polotsk, that there was an Isser of Shchita. Okay, the way it's written here sounds like they asked Shchitas Polotsk. When I read it, I thought it was the opposite. In Polotsk, they asked the Shchita. We'll figure it out, it doesn't matter. One place asked the Shchita of the other place across the river. Polotsk is on a river. So here already we see people are already being over on it, and this is also, there isn't always enough meat, and it's causing problems with Simchas Yom Tov and Shabbos. So in this sense, it's closer to our question, which it's in the sense that it's revolving around eating. Although, as Tzemach Tzedek will point out in the middle, there it really had nothing to do at all with Yiddishkeit per se. It had to do with financial considerations, trying to protect trying to protect their economy. And now they're coming and saying, we don't want this anymore. Huh?
Whose economy? It was originally to protect the economy, or now?
It was it's protectionism. They're just ensuring that you can't eat the other shchita, you have to eat our shchita. It was causing shortages though. So they're saying we don't like it anymore, and everyone, or a lot of people are being over on it anyway. And again, throughout all these discussions, remember that all of these involve actual charamas, as opposed to nowadays. Now, before I continue, I should point out that unlike, I believe, the previous tshuva, the following tshuva, we're never going to see the word chayim at all. The truth is, even the previous tshuva, if you look in Tfus Rishon, the Tafresh Lamids, you won't find the word chayim there either. What's going on? So if you look in the new Kahas Tzemach Tzedek, they write on Kuf Tzedek Daled that we have this tshuva also in Ksaviat Kodesh of the Tzemach Tzedek, and wherever it said chayim in the Ksaviat Kodesh, they changed it in the Tfus to the word Isser. So we've gone and changed all the examples back, all the words back to chayim in Siman Kuf Tzedek Daled. And I'll explain a bit more about this soon. In Siman Kuf Tzedek Gimel, there is no ha'ara in the back at all, so I guess that means that they don't have any ksav yad. We only have it from the Sefer. At this point, there's no ksav yad left of this tshuva. So if there's no ksav yad, they didn't change anything. But from the end of the tshuva, especially, it seems like there is also a chayim. It's going to say Isser at the end. So it starts off v'haran kasav. It's starting with the inyan that we're familiar with hopefully by now, the Ran that says that the idea of being matter and chayrim is based on the idea that there's a t'nai, there's an implicit t'nai that we can always be matter it. Okay, so that's how that talks about that, and seemingly right now, okay, it should be easier to be matter now. The chayra, maybe it's even the same generation. He doesn't get into that whole issue here with a trask, although later it will get a bit confusing, so we'll see later what generation we're talking about. So what's the problem? What's bothering Tzemach Tzedek? Chayrim. We're to the chayrim, right? So the Tzemach Tzedek has a different problem this time. It says, if there's some kind, it's using the word haskama, if there's some kind of there's an understanding that everyone came to together to be nizer in a certain thing, and it's a Geder l'rabim, siag l'toyer l'dvar mitzvah, you can't be mater, v'chein b'neder shel schaik, which I believe is referring to gambling, which was a big issue. People used to promise and swear to stop gambling, and then they would regret it, and they'd want to be mater that, and they would say, sorry, that's a neder, we can't be mater. So same idea. So this shova over here, Kuf Tzaddik was going to revolve around this Indian.
Who said that we can't be matter?
Shulchan Aruch says, "M'hoisa askama gadol rabim, etc. Einam yochayim lahater." And the question is, does this have to do with a chayim or not? So we'll try to get to that. So the Tzemach Tzedek gets a bit into the Mekayris, and the Tzemach Tzedek comes to the conclusion and says that this seif in Shulchan Aruch must be talking about dvarim sheyesh behem ktsas iser belav hachi, just like gambling. Gambling is already problematic. So once you make a neder, we're not going to be matter that. So these are skamis. There was clearly like a shtickle isser people were being over on, and this was a gather to that, and that's what we're talking about. The gam shekiblu beches b'cheirim. So here you see that even in Tfus sometimes a ches could sneak in, and I guess the censor didn't always notice or realize. So that's when we say that you don't have the kula that you usually have for isurei charmei tzibur. So it's not, this shouldn't be relevant to what we're talking about as he's going to explain. And we're going to get in a bit, he's going to talk about things that are in the middle. Ktsas precious yisera. So then some sort of quotes the Maribal, was mentioned Bekitzer B'Shem the Mayim album earlier, that says that if it's askama legader siyag, you can't be mevatel unless you have a based in Gadol B'Chachma B'Minyan. So if it's einal siyag, then not a problem. You don't look at whether it's Gadol B'Chachma B'Minyan or not. And then he quotes the Dovid that was mentioned earlier at the end in the Haggah, that wherever there's batal atam or takana, even a based in cotton can be mevatalit. So the Tzemach Tzedek gets back to the point. He says, "V'nidin zeh, and he loy niskana b'shvil siyag v'gader." So if a tackle was not for Yiddishkeit, kiyim l'tikun ha'ir b'achnasas moment, it was just to protect the income in the city. So v'ada yachayel ma'ater. Magam sheka'esnes batal atam shebegloli asu. First of all, it's not the siyag v'gader, so nothing to do with this sif and Shulchan Aruch. And also the tam is this batal, so that should definitely contribute to being lenient. Now Tzemach gets into this whole discussion. What about the Bnei Beisham? We mentioned already a few times that they didn't travel out of Shabbos by water. It's like a siyag to Shabbos. And the next generation want to be matter it. They were told they can't, at least in the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, Pir Chadash, the Tzemach Tzedek wasn't the Kabul, that Mahalach. So, Shani Hasam, Shehu LeMitzvah, Shelo Yispat LeMitzarchi Shabbos. Mashenki Medavar HaRashos. I already mentioned yesterday, right? You have some takanas that seem to turn into part of Yiddishkeit. And the dogma we can give of that, we're talking about takanas and the Rabbi, right? The Alter Rebbe, one of the takanas of the Alter Rebbe is sakana melutashin, the steel knives and how you're able to sharpen them in a particular way. So we call it a takana, but it has to do with the actual act of shchita. The second it caught on, it became synonymous with shechting. You don't say, oh, I'm going to go shecht, let me get my sakana melutashin. That's the shchita knife, that's the chalaf now. A mikveh bar agabe bar. You don't have to think about it each time. You build the mikveh that way, and then that becomes part of how you practice this inyan of Yiddishkeit. On the other extreme, you have things that they always feel, as long as they're active, as long as they're still being observed, it always feels like, oh, an extra, why are we doing this again? Why is this important? That's the other extreme. And you can, maybe an example of that with Alter Rebbe is the takanas liyazna. There were a whole bunch of takanas to control the flow of chassidim, and it should be very, 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 top-down, organized to a great extreme. And we see that they seem to have just expired. Certainly by the time the Alter Rebbe came to Liadi, there's no trace of them. And then there are probably things that are somewhere in the middle. Now that Tzemach Tzedek mentions Bekitzer, this gets a bit into the question of what about a Geder and a Siyag? Can the next generation be materit? And he brings the Pri Chadash and the Pri Toyer, which we mentioned from the last Shiva last time. And he says, didn't She'ein haminig mishum Geder v'Siyag, gam la Pri Toyer yochel rabbanim lahater. He seems to be talking mitzad the minig. Now, I'll try to clarify this point soon. Then the Tzemach Tzedek adds, there are things in the middle. You could see why it's a good thing. Is it mamish protecting Yiddishkeit? Is it that important? Not that important. Any siyag v'geter gomer. Unlike Bnei Beishan. So Yibazoi, weiter, yesh leima she'af abanim yochelim lahater. Goes to a Ramban. He quotes a Raivad from the Raivad that he was mitzayin earlier at the end of last Shuvah Bekitzer. Here he quotes a Bariches. Kol minig shenogu by mitzad iser v'kiblu oisei l'atzmai stam. That you can't be matir. The banim can't be matir. But minhagim achenim she'enam echshash iser. Just haskam askal davar echad ein abanim nespasan aleim v'yaskimu kul l'shanoisan reshus biyadam. So here all of a sudden Tzemach Tzedek is quoting the Raivad. Yeah, it's very easy to be metakin something the next generation. It's only a problem if it's a siyag v'geder mamish. But if it's just as hid as you say, that's not a problem. According to the Raivad. Now, it's just a little interesting. You go through these chuvas, and in one chuva, Kuf Tzaddik Dal, he doesn't touch on this question at all. Geder is siyag, not geder is siyag. He just gets very lost in the kind of next generation be materit. Here it's like the opposite. It's like, children, they could be materit if it's not a geder is siyag. And the question is it a geder or siyag or not? So one way of trying to reconcile these shuvas, at least in my mind as I was going through them, is that in this shuva, it seems to be talking about the geder of a minig, nothing to do with charamas. Everyone is doing a certain thing, no one ever even necessarily announced it. But everyone's been observing a certain thing. That's a discussion about a minig, and that's what you can discuss. What's the basis of the minig? Is it a siyag? Is it not a siyag? And there, the ikad din was the technical question, acherim. Can you be matir acherim? You cannot be matir acherim. Now, there's more that one can elaborate to be mechalik, which, in these cases, what's more of a siyag? If you have to compare svarim and a shul to shchita, more of a siyag, less of a siyag, but we don't have time to get into that, so maybe al derech hatzachas we can say that maybe in this case the minig was older, so that's why he's getting into the banim, but he's being very casual about it, and the banim can be matir, it's not a siyag. And maybe the chayrim, which he only mentions mamash bekitzer at the end, maybe the chayrim was newer. Also, we are missing the beginning. We don't have the shayla, we don't have even the beginning of the tshuva, so it could be we're missing some information. Then Tzemach Tzedek says, even if you're going to say there is, so therefore, why are we getting into this whole thing about the ktsas zehirus? Because even if you're going to say that there is ktsas zehirus, so now I can see that the people in the small town at Aser, the shchita from the big town, says, Avsha shoichtim in Palatsk are surely better, on a higher standard, than the shoichet of the Ever Hanar Kabek. But mikomakim ulay beir ktana hakatzavim yoidimu makirim oisoi yoiser makatzavim shebekrach. But in a small town, everyone knows each other, so maybe you feel more confident. You know the shoichet; it's personal, and that's a certain zehiros to stick to that shoichet rather than the more commercial system in the bigger city. So there is a shtickle zehiros. So that's why we're bavarning and we're saying because it's not a zehiros yiseda, and it's nothing to do with iser. So the Dovid, etc., would say that the Ovis can be matir, who had in Libneim. Kol shekain, that you said that it's causing, in the town, it's pushing not enough meat for Shabbos and Yom Tov, the Sheikh, I guess, can't shecht fast enough or whatever. And you're telling me that people are pirates and are already buying this flesh from Palatsk. So there's a musig in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Chav Ches that if there's a neder, but the neder is causing a hechsher, and it's not about gambling, and the person made a neder, now he's just being hechsher in it, so and he's just going to be over on it without hatara, so that's a reason to be matir. So similarly here, not a problem. Yesh lahatir b'shvil shelo yikashlu b'irabim. And now at the end, the Tzemach Tzedek remembers, what about the chedem? Mitzad the iser, which the chedem should really say hachedem. Havalei kedin iser tzibur, and should probably say chedem tzibur. Shechedem lahatirim kanal. Lashon hataras isurei tzibur. Clearly, charame tzibur. Mevur in the besois of Siman Reish Chav Ches. How you do it? The shots has to say whatever the say there is. But tzorach liyas b'mayim rakol. So unlike the previous tshuva, which was a lot more technical. Can you be matir chedem? Can you not? The discussion in Kuf Tzaddik Gimel is a lot more conceptual. We're defining differences in different minhagim, and I think it, like I said, I think it pretty much overlaps with my sprach. The way I said it, things that become part of Yiddishkeit, things that don't, or things that are somewhere in the middle. One major difference we see between the cases is that there, forget about the halachas. What was the Tzemach Tzedek's own personal opinion? How did he feel about it? It seems pretty clear from Siman Kuf Tzaddik Daled that he really wanted that they should continue keeping the Isser in place. Right? We mentioned yesterday, the Svarim and the Shtetl, the Svarim and the Shul were very important. It wasn't Stam the way you have Svarim and the Shul today. Not such a big deal. Back then, that was a library for the community. So, it seems like the Tzemach Tzedek really wanted that to remain in force. Maybe he also felt that it strengthens the Kehillah, that they have these Charamim and the Charamim are respected. But he just wanted to help them with the technical issue with the two Batei Medrash, and that's why Lamaisa, he said, you should be matter everything, just that prat that you needed. Here, it seems pretty clear that Tzemach Tzedek, just on a personal level, doesn't see that much value and importance in this takana. So, from the Tzemach Tzedek's perspective, you want it to be nisbatel, no problem. Oh, you want to tell me that it's difficult for you, and people are already being over, he's accepting all the svaras. And if we go with my Havana, that for most of the tshuva, it was a discussion in din minig, nothing to do with chedem, and only in the last paragraph did he also acknowledge the chedem, so maybe we can even be medayik that in the whole discussion about being matir and a minig, he never said how to do it. Could be that being matir and minig alone, if there's no chedem backing it up, maybe the minig itself can just be hutar and the spot on its own. Dafka, when he gets to the end, he says, mitzad ha'chedem. So then you have to follow the halachas of bittul hataras ha'chedem. Maybe we can take that idea from the Tzemach Tzedek. Now we're going to go, bekitzer, jump to Siman Kuf Pei Ches. There, the Ksav Yad in the back, the ad says in the Ksav Yad that it was about the takana, that they shouldn't pay for meat more than the price of hay ktanim kasef, small silver coins, 5 of them. And they had their price controls. So now the shaila is if roiv va'ir can be mevatel takana. And the question here, Tak, is about roiv versus everyone. Clearly, not everyone was on board with changing it. So the Tzemach gets into that question. Mar Mekayim about the roiv va'ir, kol va'ir. Tzemach Tzedek throws in, Kivin Sharei Ve'ir, Ein Yochelim Lamid Ba. He says, look in the end of Siman Reish Chav Ches, and the Ramah Sif Nun, Kol Shagazir Charamis She'ein Atzib Yochelim Lamid Ba, Ein Tzrichim L'Kaimam. He says, that, however, is only the Chatchila. If right when it goes into effect, it's clear that it's not happening, then Ein Tzrichim L'Kaimam. But here, when there are guys, they still were Yochelim Lamid Ba. And now things changed. Still will be lenient, like we see Taka with the Shemen. There's the Gzeira on Shemen Achri, just like there's Yayin Esach, and just like we have Pasakum and Bishalakum, etc. So there was Shemen. And then the Yehuda Nesiya was matter the Shemen. Why? Because they're not Tzibi Yochayim Lamidba. So you see that we look kindly on the argument that they're not Tzibi Yochayim Lamidba, even if it's La'achar HaMaisa, not B'Shas Maisa. What about the question about Roivs? He gets into a whole chakira. Should we go after Roiv people or the biggest customers? The biggest customers have the biggest stake in this issue. So do we follow Roiv Basar? Roiv? Okay, he says it should be basically Roiv of both. And then at the end, he gets to, by the way, there's a Dovid in Tmim Dayim that we already quoted twice, that in Kolel Hagas Shabbos, if it's a money that's not l'siyag, so then the banim can be mattered. So Bazai, the same thing here. This minig, shalei the shalom of litra basar, lo yaser mechamisha k'tanim kasef, ain't shayach b'zeh chashash iser. It's just a skama. It's a minig toiv. Nice to have price controls so that people don't have to overpay. And dafka we see b'chlal and chazal and halacha that we're very concerned that the price shouldn't skyrocket. But the problem here is that maybe there was inflation, whatever it was. Mitzara yoiker, the price of everything went up, so the price wasn't realistic anymore. So Abazai, there was a minik toiv, but there's a good reason, a valid reason. So, and it's not mamish achshash iser. So yichayim latidam and yaskimu kol ha'ir. Kedin hataras iser, which is really hataras chayim, lashon hatara. Then he concludes them. If you can put it. Why did he throw in the word call? Good question. The whole tshuva though was clearly about how to get to Roiv. So if you can still put in the effort and somehow keep the takana going, it's also good. Habreira b'yodam. So again, you see that when you look at what the Tzemach Tzedek actually wants, you see that the Tzemach Tzedek, either he was fine either way. You continue having the takana is nice. If the takana doesn't work out, it's also fine. Nothing about the thing itself bothered him. He's just talking about the Roiv question. That was the main discussion here. And he mentions positively that you have this, Einat Tzibu Yochel or Roivat Tzibu Yochel Amid Boy is also a factor. So we're already seeing, if you're keeping track, we've already come across a few potential Yesoidus, back to our question here, basis to potential avenues to argue that we could be makel here. But the main question, l'chayr, would be that in all these cases, at least with charamim, there was always a hatara in the end. The big question would be, is it possible for something to just expire without a hatara? So that's the last tshuva we're going to look at. Siman Kuf Tzadik Beis. They write here, the Kahas writes that, we have this in Ksav Yad Kodesh as well, and wherever it says Cherem in the Ksav Yad, they printed Isser, and we fixed it. Only problem is, if you actually read it, they didn't fix it. Not sure what that's about. But you have to keep it in mind, every time it says Isser, it's really a Cherem. Also, there are passages missing. Now, okay, let's get a little bit into the history. Why is that being censored? Why is Cherem a dirty word? What's going on here? So, just in very brief, because we don't have time, someone shared an article with me, Hanhaga B'Kehilas Russia and Bittul HaKahal, that essentially, up until a certain point, communities had an organization called the Kol. The Kol had, maybe there were elections, however it worked, but you had the Parnas Chodesh, from the old Alta Maisis, you hear there was the Parnas Chodesh, so they cycled around, month by month. There was a whole structure and hierarchy, and to some degree, they could be very controlling and very involved in many of the community's affairs. At some point along the way, the Russian government, the Tsarist government, came along and was mevatel the Kol, abolished the Kol. And that was very significant at the time in many different ways. We obviously are not getting into the details and all of the history, but this happened in 1844. The question is also why? Why did they do it? So this article is quoting from Russian sources, from Askilim. So some say that it was Pashut because there was so much strife. Every time the Kol would oppress somebody, they would run to the authorities and complain. The authorities would intervene. It was just becoming a major headache. So that could have been one factor. The Russian document, the Russian law itself seems to say that they felt that this is part of their. The Jews are are living in their own bubble. As we know, the Russian government was very bothered by the fact that the Jews were running their own show. They're not integrated in society. Other Gzeres, we spoke about Gzeres HaMalbushim, so that was a part of that they're trying to make the Jews feel like they're living within the larger community, not within their own mini community. And a more extreme version of that, he quotes from some maskell, was that it was basically to destroy Yiddishkeit indirectly. That's about the call generally. Now the cherem was one of the tools of the call. That was how they had control. They used to, every takana, as we see, came along with charamis, and they didn't hesitate to actually enforce them when they felt like it, and they would run people out of town and destroy their lives, and that was absolutely part of how they kept everyone in line. And that also probably led to a lot of strife, and people were complaining to the authorities. So the cherem was actually abolished even earlier, in 1804. Already, that's now the time of the Alter Rebbe, the Tafkuf Samachs. They already abolished the cherem. Then again, in the 1830s, when they passed the law about the Jews, Jewish affairs, again they said cherem is out. And then this article goes through many sources about how the call didn't exactly disappear entirely. It maybe became less democratic, but the Jewish community was still running its own affairs in one way or another, and charamim and physical punishments and things like that definitely continued afterwards for a while, as we can see from different people's descriptions and memories. So for this reason, it went so far that the word cherem literally became a dirty word, and it was censored, and that's why it's changed to Isser everywhere. Getting back to Kuf Halachic base. So they said, we made a tikkun, or a cherem probably, in our kehillah, that it's not so clear, but there was, from every transaction, it sounds like some money should be put in the community, the teva, the pushka. And there was a cherem chomer, and everyone was involved, everyone was there. And now, Reuben Kekulam are being moil in the cherem. Some because they can't afford it. Some just say, no, everyone else is fifing on them, so we're also. When we made the cherem, we said Shaloi Letzar from the Dovid Shebekdusha. We're very clear about what the cherem meant. And now they're saying that, and then there are others that are saying that we don't want to be mevatel the cherem b'shemayim. So what do we do now? Do we still have to keep on giving the money, or is it just batel because it's already defunct? And also, and here this part was censored, the whole rest of the letter, we have it from the Ksav Yad. What about the tsar from the Dovid Shebekdusha? There was no way to put that in print, because that's a cherem by any word you use to call it. So they just left it out. What about that? Do you have takaf to enforce the nidui or the mamish? So we're asking, this is from Horidich, Tafkuf Pei Gimel. So we have two responses on the Tzemach Tzedek, a longer one where he's like doing shakal v'taya to himself, and then a shorter one that he seems to have actually sent to them. So in the longer one he says, is it batel because you're just being moil ba'atikan? Nearly as daiti she'ena takonim es batelas mamela, it can't go away on its own. Tzrichim loimar huter atikun, like we see in the Mishpat HaCherem, even the name of the Sefer gets censored, Mishpat HaIsurin of the Ramban. And the Tashbetz. The Tashbetz says that begili das, it's also misbatel. It says the Tashbetz though is talking about something else. If you take a look at the Tashbetz, because this is taka important, the Tashbetz describes, Tashbetz was from Spain, his family was from Spain, they ended up in North Africa. He says that in his community, whenever they used to make a takana, they used to say, Kayach cherem. We're being metakan this with the Kayach of the cherem. He says, what does that mean? What is Kayach cherem? So his argument is that Kayach cherem is not a cherem. If you wanted to make a cherem, you would say cherem. You don't find anywhere in Chazal that it says Kayach cherem in Yishayim. He says, you know where it comes from? It comes from Laz. It comes from how the Goyim talk. And hu etzlam hatakas lashon halaz she'oimrim sotas pina. So looked it up. What does that mean? So in Catalan, which is a variant of Spanish, sots pena means under penalty. So the Goyim, when they say laws, for them, they want to make the law sound important. They say under penalty of whatever. So the Yidden started saying kayach cherem, kayach cherem. He says, mamash, they're just translating it from the Spanish in their mind into Hebrew. He says, but that's nothing. It's just kayach cherem. So if everybody decides that they want to be mevatel they never were machrim. Gazmu, they were threatening. V'gilu daitim shirut soinim lahachrim. They were threatening that if you do it, then we're threatening that we'll then put you in cherem. But they haven't. The people that were over on it were never put in cherem. If you say that you're automatically in cherem, that means that everybody in this community is in cherem now, because everybody was over on it. You can't say that. It's just a threat. So the Tzemach Tzedek, the Tashbit says all this, because there the Taka said, Koyach Isser, Koyach Cherem. That's not a Cherem Mamish. So from here we see that it is a Cherem Mamish, then it doesn't go away on its own. Okay, we have to be Mekatzer. V'chein Mashma, he says, from Yehuda Nesiya, who was Matur the Shemen, because that's the thing that people might think of when they think about this topic. Oh, you see, the Shemen, the people weren't keeping the Gzeira of Shemen, and then the Gzeira went away. Tzemach Tzedek says no. Because le'pashat yisuroi hitter Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya to Shemen. Mashma lehedya, the bittelay etzarech, v'lo yemuter me'elav, v'masho yisem neged hatakana. Then there's our God, tzarech iyan, the piskei maharai. Maharai, I assume you know, is the Trumas Hadashkan. So there's Trumas Hadashkan and there's Psakim. Piskei maharai. So there it talks about takana b'negei shachtim, and that they weren't mekayim it, because that's not good. Well, you should be mekayim it, but if they're not mekayim it, then it sounds like it's ois. So tzarech. Then he compares it to miyun. In miyun, a girl has been mine in kedusha ktana. So the Gemara says that even if she never was mine, but she went and got married, Yehuda ben Beseida says nisueha hein miyuneha. So it sounds like that, instead of Dibur, Maisa, showing that you're not acknowledging, that you're not being noyeg lefi that kedushin, or in this case, an isser, a cherem, that should be enough. You're voting with your feet. It says, no, yesh leima daf kamiyan, kedusha de rabbanon, cherem, biyasoida is mederaisa. And anyway, you need the rabbim to be materit, and each person being over it is being over as a yachid. You need to bring the rabbim together. The fact that everyone's being over on it, that's not together. Then in Siman Shin Mem, in the Miluim, we have the continuation, because in the Tshuva they also censored what about Dovid Shebekdusha. So that was printed by the Rebbe in the Miluim, which is now Siman Shin Mem. Sheksaf the Moed about that. No, yeah, you have to take it. God errands, the tzar from the Dovid Shebekdusha, but you need to aid him. Gets into that. Then we have the Tshuva B'Ktsara, and again, more or less, goes through that can't be Mizbatal Memela, just by being Oisim Maisa Chas V'Shalom Neged the Isser. It has to be B'Maimed Kulam. So being over on it individually is not Roiv. The Ruba has to be Mitoich Kula, you have to gather everybody, and then the Roiv have to say, we want to be Materit. So Milsa the Pshiti she'en shom heter chas v'shalom limo be'isra de masha roiv mo'elim chas v'shalom. So on the one hand, that's basically the tshuva. So on the one hand, he's being ma'idach and saying that it can't be his battle on its own, although he doesn't seem to have any problem with them being materit properly, again. But on the other hand, he did mention this tashbitz, about the kayach cherem. And even if you disagree with their tashbitz about kayach cherem, that's if you use the words kayach cherem. But if there's no lashon cherem, maybe we can conclude from the Tzemach Tzedek that wherever there's no cherem, if it's tam and isser, maybe it could be this battle just by voting with your feet. Now, lahayr, then the next shuvah, Simon Kuf Tzedek, which is about the haskamas, the big controversy of the shasin, that there was the haskama not to print within 15 years, and then they ran out of sets to sell, but they still didn't want, the Slavita didn't want Vilna to print, and Vilna was fighting, and Tzemach Tzedek took Vilna's side for whatever reason. So he has this whole arichas about where do these Isurim come from? When you give a haskama, you give an Isur, you have to know what the basis for your own Isur is. If you don't know what the basis is, or it's Shalei Kadin, Pshita de B'Teil Lagam, you can't just say the word Isur and it becomes Asur. Here he actually mentions, what about the Cherem? Hein Emes, Shebamachas HaKira, Ein Geizim Klal B'Cherem, Mitzad Shu Neged Dinah D'Malchusa, the Tzemach Tzedek acknowledges that in Rosh there's no Cherem, but B'Eretz Yishmael, they have a cherem, would it work there? He says, no, if the isser underlying the cherem doesn't make any sense, and we say that isser is nishken isser, so the cherem on top of that is also nishken cherem. Gets into Mechiras Yosef, where they made a cherem not to reveal to Yaakov, was that a legitimate cherem or was it not? All arichas on that. He says, Goinim da'achshav, no matter how great they are, they're not on the level of Rabbeinu Gershom, they can't just make takanas, pull takanas and insert them out of their hat. So if there were mekabelit and it wasn't kedin, then l'chayra it's ois. So you see it's almost like Bechalal has an issue with random yisurim that are coming from nowhere that don't make so much sense. And the Chedushi at Tzemach Tzedek and Baba Basra, there's also an Aftas, there's also an arichas there. And there the Tzemach Tzedek says, right about the haskamas, the rabbanim g'dolim, says pshita shein ma'haskama klum. You're writing things. Me'izah kayachu. The Rav is not the Tuva Yair. He's here to paskin. Who gave the Rav powers to declare Yisurim on people? It's a very interesting Makaitis here from the Tzemach Tzedek about things like this. So in summation, we certainly didn't have a chance to go through dozens and dozens of Makaitis on this topic. There's a whole sefer, Tuvei Yair, by Rav Yosef Goldberg, Adan Yerushalayim. It's malakit from the Achreinim in a very nice way on this topic. And even in Tzemach Tzedek, I don't feel like we got to every single word in the Tzemach Tzedek, but I believe that we see a lot of potential Yesaidis here, in our case, to be matter even without letter b'ksav. First of all, did these rabbanim have the power b'chlal to declare nisr? To keep in mind, these rabbanim and the early mems were not elected, they just were, maybe they were serving as matzim, you could say. So the local matz has the power to just declare an isser and it becomes asr. Who says they have the power? B'chlal, like the Tzemach Tzedek says about askamas. Was it kedin? Is this? They said, oh, we're reacting to a ma'aseh nevala. Is that kedin? If there's a ma'aseh nevala, that's how you respond. What's the connection? They don't really explain the rationale. Maybe many would say it was just like a political move. You want to punish them. You want to boycott them. You want it to hurt. You want to strengthen your own hechsher, maybe. So even if there's a ktsasa here, you could say it's a geder of a minig that's batal me'atzmai. It sounded like, perhaps, without a cherem, a minig on its own could be batal me'atzmai. Like we said, there's talking no cherem here, just the word isser. And they passed away already. And they say that batzim, they were chayzer behem, and the Talmud was batal, and maybe at this point the Rav are not even following it anymore. So between a lot of these ideas, of course, would have to be written up properly in Masudr to make a conclusive argument, but that, bekitzer, is my take on this topic.